So welcome everybody. It's great to see you all. And we're here today for the productive work sessions with Anamarija Batista and Iris Lanner. So I'm Jenny Guy, and I'm the manager of program and operations here at Fire Station Artist Studios, and I'm also an independent curator and artist. So for those of you who don't know what Fire Station is, Fire Station provides vital live-work accommodation for artists in Dublin Northeast City Centre, and Fire Station has been here for 27 years, and it's a unique example of this kind of resource in Ireland. And our main focus is to support the artists who live here and who have residencies here, and we also have a vibrant programme of events and workshops during the year and commission new writing. And as part of our program, because it is a live and work place, you can imagine that we've had to adapt quite quickly during COVID. And as part of our program every year, we organize a curatorial summer school. So the invited curator proposes a theme that we evolve together. And this year I'm very excited to be working with Anamarija, who proposed the theme productive work. So originally Anna would have been coming here to Dublin with Iris for a 4-day-long summer school, but we've adapted this year's school into this single session with the hope that we might continue this into a longer format event into the future. So now I'm going to give you a quick introduction to Anna and Iris. Anamarija Batista is a researcher, lecturer, and freelance curator. Batista graduated from Economy and Art History at the University in Vienna. She's taught at the Vienna University of Economics and Business, at the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, the University of Applied Arts Vienna, and the Vienna University of Technology. She has curated a series of exhibitions, including Productive Work, What Is It Supposed to Be?, in the Freiraum in the MuseumsQuartier, Bosch and Hofbauer, the Paintings Gallery of the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna in 2018, the Munchhausen-Effect, On Time in Times of Having No Time in Galerie 5020 in 2017, Crisis' Ideology in the Kunstraum Niederösterreich in 2016. Her publication, Rethinking Density, Art, Culture and Urban Practices, was released by Sternberg Press as part of the publication series of the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna in 2017. Since 2018, she's been working on the project Collective Utopias of Post-War Modernism, the Adriatic Coast as a leisure and defense paradise, together with Antonia Dika, which is supported by the FWF, the Austrian Science Fund. So Iris Lanner studied philosophy, fine arts and art education in Vienna. She completed her dissertation on the temporality of images at the University of Basel in 2012. Following research and teaching fellowships in Switzerland, Belgium, Germany and Austria, she is currently working as a professor of art education at the University of Music and Dramatic Arts Mozarteum in Salzburg. Her research focuses on processes of aesthetic learning, the notion of critique, and the relatedness of body and mind.
Good morning or good afternoon. It's so nice. We are very happy that you invited us to give this presentation today. And I think we will begin with the presentation immediately concerning the time issue. So today we will speak about the productive work, but also about its counterpart, the unproductive work. So we are asking ourselves what the productive work is supposed to be. We have 4 parts that we want to present today, and we will begin with a kind of thinking about how the productive work has been thought within the economic theory. So there we will see that the productive work is something that is very much connected to the actually economic models and economic thoughts. On the other hand, we will then go to some philosophers and sociologists that also thought about the term productive work, but in the connection to the artistic practice. Why do we think that economic theory and artistic practice and cultural work are very much connected to each other? Is because actually the art is somehow reflecting on the social processes and economic processes, and is very much, if we are speaking with the words of Adorno, commenting actually that the structures of the society. So the third thing that we want to connect to each other, it's the aesthetic education and the terms of the productivity, because we have this moment where the aesthetic education is actually the place where the artists get the education, or how somehow discuss and learn about the artistic practice, but also actually the visitors, or the audience is also educated within the school and within the university how to think or how to reflect on the artistic thoughts, world and practices. So that's the reason why we have these four parts. The one, productive versus unproductive work, we speak about the economic thoughts. Then we speak more about Pierre Bourdieu, Adorno, and Jacques Rancière. So we will, like, in very short, we will introduce some thoughts of them about the role of the art in the society. In the third part, we will speak about two experiments, Bauhaus and Black Mountain College, which are somehow tried to overcome the existing structures in the education at the beginning, in the 20s and 30s, and then after the Second World War. And then at the end, we will speak about actually education practices and the role of the productivity in there. So I will begin with a quotation of Marx. Labor is first of all a process between man and nature, a process by which man through his own actions mediates, regulates and controls the metabolism between himself and the nature. So the human work processes are closely related to nature. The work is an existential anthropological basic category, which means that it determines the power, gender, and existence relationships of human coexistence. So we have this moment that the labor is actually the process which is very much constructing the power relationships within the society. So who actually does the productive work depends on the models of economic theories and ideas. So in the 16th century, we have the physiocrats who taught that the source of wealth are soil and nature. They are again very interesting because we have the question, who is the owner of the soil today is very, very prominent, and we are discussing very much about the question of the collectiveness and the soil. Adam Smith and Karl Marx have been thinking that the wage workers generate added value for the capitalist, and the worker not only replaces an old value but creates also the new one. So more labor is objectified in his product than in the product that keeps him alive as a worker. So it was not anymore just soil and nature, but it was the worker in the factory who was able to produce more value for the capitalist, who then reinvest the accumulated capital. I would like to give you a quote of Adam Smith, where he's thinking about what should be a productive labor and what should be an unproductive labor. He said, there is one sort of labor which adds to the value of the subject upon which it is best owed. There is another which has no such effect. The former, as it produces a value, may be called productive, the later unproductive labor. Thus, the labor of a manufacturer adds generally to the value of the materials which he works upon, that of his own maintenance and of his master's profit. The labor of a manual servant, on the contrary, adds to the value of nothing. So we have this moment where the factory workers is actually doing the productive work and the other one not. Karl Marx, so Smith notes also that the unproductive labor can be useful, like the servants, or pleasant from the, when we hear to the singers, or even necessary when we think about the judges. So Karl Marx follows Smith's reasoning and distinguished between labor that can be exchanged for capital and labor that is paid from a rent. Unproductive labor, in the sense of Marx, is productive in the sense of use value creation, but not productive in the sense of value creation. So we have here a kind of distinction between productive labor, which can accumulate or which can contribute to the capital accumulation, and the one which is paid from the rent or from the profit. There is also different thoughts on how did capitalism increase its productivity. The one of the thinker is the Max Weber, who argued that the Protestant ethics actually was the one that motivated the paradigm shift toward work and the pursuit of profit. The Werner Sombart, he lived also in the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. He's a sociologist. He developed an alternative theory and the claim that the central motor for the transition from feudalism to the bourgeoisie was actually the human striving for luxury and the social changes. And here he's speaking about Italy in the 14th and 15th century and about the Medici and their striving for luxury. And then we have the third position, and which is very interesting one, is from the Georges Bataille, who assumed that the surplus wealth cannot be accumulated. So that's the reason why capitalism is a mistake and the consequence of turning away from the correct handling of these surpluses. So the Bataille is writing, our ignorance only has this incontestable effect. So it causes us to undergo what we could bring about in our own way if we understood. It deprives us of the choice of an excudation that might suit us. Above all, it consigns men and their work to catastrophic destructions. So if we do not have the force to destroy the surplus energy ourselves, it cannot be used, and like an unbroken animal that cannot be trained, it is this energy that destroys us. It is we who pay the price of the inevitable explosion. So there is this very interesting thinking about the moment when we are accumulating this energy, that this will end in some sort of destruction, like a war or some things. But we have, as the human beings, we have we have different forms of self-waste, said Bataille. The one is, for example, agonal one, competitions, games of all kinds, affective one like laughing or crying, symbolic one like art, music, literature, saints like revolt, revolutionary sacrifice, festival of dead as a festival of life. So then I would like to come to the thinking from Silvia Federici about reproductive work in the 70s. We have a feminist movement in Italy where they find out that the Marxists, or already like Adam Smith and David Ricardo, were the one who actually make the separation between the public and the private labor. So the Silvia Federici, I quote her, Marx did not see that in the process of original accumulation, not only the peasantry is separated from their land, but there is also a separation between the production process, so production for the market, production of goods, and the reproductive process, production of labor. So these two processes begin to separate physically and moreover to be carried out by different subjects. The first process is most male and the second female, the first wage related and the second unpaid. So here we have a kind of distinction between reproductive work and the one which is like wage related. So what we wanted to show you into this first part, that through the history of the economic thought, we have a different constructions of the field productive work. So what is really the productive work? Who is able to do the productive work? And where this productive work is happening. So it's a kind of a short introduction, but it shows us that the terms productive work and unproductive work are terms which are very much constructed by the society. So then we want to come to the role of the art. And to the question of how is the position of the cultural field or of the artistic field within the field of power, as the Pierre Bourdieu would discuss it. He is of the opinion that the position of the cultural field is very much connected to the structures and relationships of the economic and political field. So it doesn't exist in its own. What he differentiates is, on the one hand, the artistic field, which is very much connected to the market field, or to the market, and the one of the artistic process where we are producing like the artistic works. This kind of field, he was thinking, has a kind of autonomy. But at the moment, when it comes out of the atelier, we have this strong relationship between the structure of positions within the artistic field and the structure of positions of different groups of users in the social space surrounding them. Then we have another thinker, Theodor Adorno, who was thinking about the autonomy of art very much, and who was arguing that the art has a kind of responsibility to give the comment to the society and the society structures, and that's the reason why it should be also has a kind of a distance to the society. So he's of the, for example, artworks are after images of empirical life insofar as they help the later to what is denied them outside their own sphere. and thereby free it from that to which they are condemned by refined external experience. So Adorno has a very positive thought about the possibility of the artistic practice in concerning the process of dialectic he's very much thinking about. So at the center, so he's again writing at the center of contemporary antinomies is that art must be and wants to be utopia. And the more utopia is blocked by the real functional order, the more this is true. But yet at the same time, art may not be utopia in order not to betray it by providing semblance and consolation. If the utopia of art were fulfilled, it would be art's temporal and emphasis mine. So again, why do we think that the artistic practice and reflection within the artistic practice is connected to the construction of the term productivity within the economic theory? Because on the one hand, according also to Adorno, it reflects on it, it comments on it, how the productivity is taught within the society and the economic and political field. But on the other hand, it's also, according to Pierre Bourdieu, actually a part of it. It's also a part of the market. It's also a part it's a field where also a kind of productivity has been assumed. Now I will give over to Iris, who will speak or give you some insight into the thoughts of Jacques Rancière.
Thanks, Anna. So like Adorno, Jacques Rancière thinks about the relationship between the artistic and the political sphere, and this political sphere also includes the economic sphere. While Adorno highlights the autonomy of art, as Anna already stressed, Rancière is more hesitant in this respect. He takes interest in the infiltration and further the disturbing of the political order with the means of art. So art is somehow also positioned within this political sphere. His theoretical approach is useful when it comes to thinking about art as a resistant practice and also like as a reflective practice, as Anna already pointed out. So in a neoliberal world, artistic practices can resist the economic pressure of productivity, one could say. This implies that the artist's work has to be located beyond the dualism productive, unproductive. It has to escape the economic logic. So for understanding his approach, we can start by clarifying a central term, the distribution of the sensible, which is a very well-known term with reference to Rancière. So the distribution of the sensible refers to what is shared within a community, both in terms of inclusion and exclusion. It deals with the partition of time and space. So the grounding idea is that not everybody can possess everything. Not everybody can be at the same place at the same time, that resources are limited. What is perceivable and intelligible shapes the actual communal existence of persons. For a community and for politics, of course, it is crucial to determine who has to fulfill which task, also in terms of work, but also who can see and understand and who has a voice. Who can structure the space of the visible, the audible, and the sayable. Politically and socially, this leads to a mixture of commonness and exclusiveness, of sharing and distributing. Rancière now claims that aesthetics is the foundation of politics. What does this mean? It means that all forms of interaction and all social struggles are linked to the level of the sensible, of how we experience and perceive, of how we feel. At the same time, politics shapes the way we experience, we perceive, and we feel. So aesthetics here is not understood in terms of a theory of art, but more generally as considering the sensible, its inherent norms and limitations. Aesthetic practices negotiate the distribution of the sensible, and herein they are political. They aim at a new partition of time and space, so they question the existing order. With this, aesthetic practices also allow for viewing the world differently, for developing an alternative approach regarding the sensible. Besides their political, they can have an educational impact. So this is a thought that we will explore further in this coming minutes. So politically, there is the possibility of revolutions that comes along with the new distribution of the sensible through aesthetic practices. Rancière now discusses different instances of revolution. Referring to the field of literature, he speaks about Gustave Flaubert's social novel. Here I have a picture of it, Madame Bovary. In this work, he sees a promise of democracy because the existing distribution of the sensible is undermined. He says that the novel, the social novel, the realist social novel, works with pure description. It does not seek moral judgment, and it does not make use of indoctrination. So the novel is therefore regarded as a democratic mode of narration. The novel can be read by everyone, as Rancière stresses. The description is neutral. Everybody can read the novel in the way they want. Everybody can connect to it. So dealing with artworks like the social novel can initiate a process of democratization, as Rancière points out, since it postulates the equality of everything and everybody, and so overcomes the existing distribution of the sensible. What Rancière speaks about with reference to Flaubert is the modernist turn, which forces the dissolution of the hierarchy between real and fictitious elements, so between living speech and depicted reality. Spoken on a more general level, aesthetic experience can reshape our perception of the world and therefore question the existing distribution of the sensible, because it becomes evident that it is limited and restrictive. So we now turn to speak about the topic aesthetic education. With his view on the possibilities that come along with art in an educational and in a political respect, Rancière refers to the Enlightenment thinker and idealist Friedrich Schiller. The concept of equality is crucial in this respect, so is freedom. Schiller's idea that is taken up by Rancière is that aesthetic education is a necessary condition for political revolution. In Schiller, aesthetic education means becoming free in view of an artistic work. Becoming free here also means to free oneself from social norms and economic pressure. Moreover, aesthetic education in Schiller is unproductive, one might say so. Nothing is produced in the course of aesthetic experience, and this is a very important thought in all the idealist aesthetics. Aesthetic experience has no external ends. It means that something is regarded just for the sake of it. Aesthetic education can occur in the process of contemplating a work of art. Contemplation implies the inhibition of all productive forces. It comes along with turning away from work. So with their respective perspectives, Bourdieu, Adorno, and especially Rancière urge rethinking the terms productive and unproductive, as well as work with regard to the field of art. And this was the leading thought to bring these positions in. Moreover, the discussion about art is linked with thinking about the conditions of experiencing, perceiving, feeling, and judging aesthetic artifacts. Bourdieu is very lucid in this respect, but also Adorno and Rancière suggest that education is an important aspect of developing an approach to art. So both for the artist and for the viewer, of freeing oneself, so to say, from productiveness and work orientation. So other than in the picture of Rancière or Schiller respectively, aesthetic education is not always free from the ideal of productivity, and it does not necessarily lead the way to freeing oneself from this ideal, like Schiller stresses. We now want to shortly introduce two institutionalized ways, or two experiments, as Anna said before, of dealing with productivity in the field of aesthetics or arts education. So while the Bauhaus, which Anna now introduces, takes aesthetic education as not leading away from productivity and work, Black Mountain College underlines that education must be free of the economic pressure of productivity. We now just want to sketch this contradiction.
Bauhaus began its work in Weimar in 1919. In 1926, they moved to Dessau, where they had their new building, which they designed. The architects of the Bauhaus designed it, and then afterwards, because of the fascism, they had to move to Berlin, and then they closed. The most of them then emigrated to America. So the Walter Gropius was the first director of Bauhaus, and in the 1919 he wrote a manifest where he was thinking about on the one hand about the connection between the craftsmanship and the artist, and on the other hand about the role of the interdisciplinarity. So they were, sorry, because of this, they were thinking actually also about the mass production, and what was also the aim is the design and artistic practice become a part of our everyday life. So also within our households, we should be somehow connected to the good design and to the good artistic practice. So in this manifest from 1919, Gropius is writing, architects, sculptors, painters, we all must return to craftsmanship, for there is no such thing as art by profession. There is no essential difference between the artist and the artisan. And then, so let us therefore create a new guild of craftsmen, free of the divisive class pretensions that endeavored to raise the prideful barrier between craftsmen and artists. Let us strive for, conceive, and create the new building of the future that will unite every discipline, architecture and sculpture and painting, and which will one day rise heavenwards from the million hands of craftsmen as a clear symbol of a new belief to come. What's interesting about this moment of the interdisciplinarity is that on the one hand, the Gropius is very much speaking about the fusion between the disciplines, but on the other hand, he's also wrote that the architecture, but he was the architect, is of course the one of the most important disciplines within it. What they also did, they had a lot of, they lived together, for example, in Dessau. The students and the professors were there at the campus, and they had a lot of common spaces, so where they could discuss their ideas. He's one performance of Oskar Schlemmer. They had a lot of, I think, the concerts, the theater pieces, all these kind of formats that that were part of their education and where they and their university everyday life, where they also represent and present their thoughts and their innovative ideas. Iris will tell you something about the Black Mountain College.
So Black Mountain College was founded in 1933, and it was finally closed after more than 20 years in 1957. So although there is a deep ideological but also personal connection between Bauhaus and Black Mountain College, Josef Albers, for instance, who was at Bauhaus, fled to the US after the shutdown of the Bauhaus by the Nazis, and he was also a member of Black Mountain College. There is a different idea about freedom and the relation to productivity that guides the understanding of aesthetic education of the respective institutions, and this is what is of interest for us. So the founders of Black Mountain College aimed at developing a, so this is Josef Albers teaching at Black Mountain. So they aimed at developing a more flexible curriculum with the holistic aim to educate a student as a person and a citizen. So the core idea here is that Black Mountain College should provide a free space and enough time for studying. So these are two very central aspects. Students should be given the chance to develop as a person and as a citizen. What does this mean? This means that there is a focus on the development on the individual and on the general. Black Mountain pedagogues underlined the equality of students and teachers. So they tried to dissolve the hierarchy between teachers and students. Interestingly, Monsieur adheres to this pedagogical idea as well. He refers to Joseph Jacotot, a French teacher, in order to develop his theory of universal education, as he calls it, and also focuses on equality. So in general, it can be stated that Black Mountain College's ideals point towards giving more freedom to students. In order to achieve these ideals, economic productivity and vocational training are problematized. And this is a very big difference to Bauhaus, because Bauhaus really focused on vocational training. Black Mountain adheres to a humanistic ideal of education. So art making is regarded as a crucial and indispensable part of a general holistic education. This is very important. And as a consequence, everybody should have access to art and art making. Art is no surplus or privilege, but an essential element of education. So, and now we turn to the education part, which is the last part of this first presentation, first part of the presentations that we make here, or the presentations in general. And then we come to speak about our artistic examples afterwards. So what we said about Rancière, Schiller, Bauhaus, Black Mountain College, and aesthetic education already indicates that we see some potential in bringing in concepts that go beyond economics and artistic practice in the narrow sense. So we assume that thinking about productive work in the field of education and aesthetic education specifically will open up a range of interesting questions that allow to take over yet another perspective towards the issues discussed in the workshop, art and productive work. So with a focus on education and the role education plays within a current understanding of productivity, it becomes possible to discuss the processes leading to or diverting from productive work in and beyond the field of the arts. In order to arrive at such a discussion, we will give a short overview of some aspects, themes, and questions that could contribute to stimulating taking over other perspectives. We will ask, what do the terms productive, unproductive, and work mean with regard to education? How can we arrive at discussing the contrastive pair productive versus unproductive in the field of education? Which shifts and deferments of the concepts work, productivity, and unproductivity come along with flipping the perspective to educational processes and issues? With the turn to competency-based learning that regulates our current understanding of education, the idea of a self-sufficient general education has been abandoned. And I already referred to the humanistic idea of general education before when I spoke about Black Mountain College. So what is the humanistic idea of general education that seems to be abandoned today? So this is Wilhelm von Humboldt. He is a pioneer thinker of the humanistic education. He wrote his groundbreaking works in the beginning of the 19th century. His thinking is shaped by the spirit of the Enlightenment, and here he is very close to Schiller, whom I spoke about before. Education, or Bildung, aims at the holistic development of a person as a world citizen. And we already heard this before when I spoke about Black Mountain College development, individually and generally, so person and citizen. The educational space is unrestricted according to Humboldt. Educational time is unlimited, both hypothetically, of course, and allows the students to freely explore their individuality. General education focuses on individual interests on the one hand and on the principles of modern science on the other hand. Reason, logic, and empirical methods are important tools for acquiring general knowledge. The holistic idea in humanistic education comes down to the following conviction. All powers and forces within an individual have to be in line with each other in order to form a character. Education has to lead the way in order to fully and holistically develop and integrate one's powers and forces. The central aims of a general education in the humanistic sense, therefore, are formation of character, cultivation of the mind, and intensification of reasonableness. General education now is not about being or becoming productive in the first place. The process of learning and studying is understood as becoming free for exploring matters of interest. Still, there is a perspective on work and productivity in terms of vocational training in humanistic thinking. General education lies the foundation for vocational training. If a person is generally educated, they will acquire specific skills afterwards faster and much more easily. Professional skills can be acquired faster and more efficiently by an educated person. Educated persons are more flexible and more productive in terms of working. So there are still many intellectuals today that hold up to a humanistic ideal of education. The reality in educational institutions has changed a lot though. Within the last 20 years, the Bologna process has shaped the understanding of educational processes in the European higher education area. The turn to competency-based education comes along with the necessary abandonment of humanistic idea and the development of a neoliberalist perspective on education. With regard to work and productivity, this means education more and more becomes vocational training. Education has its end in producing workforce and not in providing the free space for individual development and the acquisition of general knowledge. Education becomes work. Bologna understands learning as a quantifiable, decomposable process. The streamlining of work that shaped the Industrial Revolution seems to be a model for the current streamlining of educational processes. So there's a definition of general milestones, an assignment of time slots, ECTS, you will know that. The amount of work that is necessary to reach a milestone is exactly defined. Within the Humboldtian picture, it is difficult to detect the productivity of a learner, since studying is regarded as a complex, multi-layered process, and the aim of education as the becoming of the whole person and acquiring of general knowledge. Within the neoliberalist picture, the productivity of a learner becomes measurable in terms of the competencies they have acquired and in terms of the ECTS that have been invested in studying. So after this rough and short outline, we will now come back to the perspective of aesthetic education. Like art in general, aesthetic education seems to be a bearer of hope and lead a way out of economic pressure and the ideal of productivity. It is not surprising that therefore, within discussions about aesthetic education, the neoliberalists turn and the competency-based principles are criticized. Like we saw before, Schiller, for instance, regards aesthetic education as the golden way to allow persons to become humanists. Becoming humanist seems to imply that one has to turn their back on neoliberalist constraints and on a neoliberalist conception of productivity and work especially. So, yeah, these are the theoretical thoughts that we like to introduce for a discussion about artworks. And this is now the second part of the workshop. But before, I think there is some space or some need for discussion.
Yeah. So we wanted to give you a kind of insight, a kind of also to show how the productivity is not just what is very much the people think when today when you heard the word productivity, then you think how much sources and resources you put into the process and how much of them came out. So this proportion between income and outcome. The productivity is the term which is very much connecting not just to the economy, but influence also other fields. We spoke today about artistic praxis and aesthetic building. So we would like to open up the discussion. We don't have to maybe, it can be a kind of an example, or you can introduce your own thoughts, or we can speak about a specific thinker. So it's up to you how you want to do the discussion. And I think we can also think the discussion is that in that way that everybody can also answer. We don't have to have this, you are posing the questions and we are answering it. We can try to make a kind of a talk. So if I pose a question, somebody else can answer it if he has an idea.
I have an observation to make just about kind of the experience of receiving this knowledge. You know, your presentation was so dense, and I find myself kind of frantically trying to, first of all, listen, understand, digest, and, you know, thanks to Jenny for the invitation to be an active listener. But then, of course, with that comes kind of a feeling that I should respond. And I'm kind of thinking about all of these kind of shoulds and the experience of these kinds of seminars and how closely they are linked to what we are talking about in terms of productivity. That the act of listening or the act of engaging in these forms of, I mean, what is this? You know, it's a retelling of knowledge to people in the hope that a discussion will happen, but yet there's this kind of expectation of reproduction immediately within these frameworks. So how can we think about the topic of productivity in terms of, and sorry, Anna, you mentioned it at the beginning that, you know, with the time constraint, but it's the immediacy of the need for the turnover of knowledge into something other than itself that is striking me, but that's because of my particular position here today. So how does this ideology of productivity impact our capacity for understanding, I guess, is my question. Or yeah, I don't know.
I think we prepared this first part in order to have a kind of insights for the second part, where we are speaking about the artistic work in itself. We have, on the one hand, it's very dense. On the other hand, there is when you speak about that very clearly, it is actually about productive factors, which are soil, labor, and capital, and how this kind of development happened. And at the other hand, in the aesthetic educational practice, you're speaking about the process of contemplation and the process of the critique. So there are different kinds of thinkers which reflect on it or discuss it, but we have these moments, and then you have, of course, the collective and the individual. I agree to you. Also, that's the reason why for a long time we postpone it, because we really wanted to come to Dublin and also to have this, you know, it's a different kind of experience to be in the same place, to have a coffee together, to know what are your somehow interests and backups, and then you can maybe make it much more for us, or for me, is also a very new format to give lectures online. Which
I get just a little addendum to that. I'm not saying this as some kind of critique of your presentation or of this format. It's just seems that, I don't know if it's a COVID thing, or I'm having actually difficulty distinguishing between pre and post COVID now, but this harnessing of every single thing that this feeling that I have, I don't know if we all have it, that I must harness every single experience that I have into something other than itself. I'm wondering if that is a pre-COVID thing or a post-COVID thing for me, and the same just applies to this kind of thing. So I guess this idea of like conversation being a form of being that possibly leads to new possibilities is shut down by this expectation, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to comment on the comments and the process. I think, obviously I'm in the position of being an active listener as well, and it really, the way that you have organized and structured this, Anamarija and Iris, I think I'm really interested in the process of how we analyze, how we structure, how we organize, and then the synthesis of us talking and relating, and sort of the process of putting your own experience into what you're telling us and what our prior knowledge is and what we're gaining from one another. And I just kind of, thinking about that, I was really thinking about sort of the circularity of all of these things and how they're interconnected and how they're sort of processes that repeat, and how we're living through a particular moment of all of these issues around basically structural organization of economy, and sort of how that translates into productivity and work, and what work is as opposed to play, or as opposed to relationality, and how then the aesthetics fits into those discussions and those ideologies about aesthetic as a value judgment in terms of, languages, visuality of art, but also how that translates and how that's related to the other meaning that you're bringing up of aesthetics as forms of knowledge and being more experiential about the world, and the various kind of art movements and processes, where you linked Bauhaus and Black Mountain, I thought was really interesting about the sort of certain deconstructions and reconstructions of those things, and how they're very related to forms of economy and systems and education, how that is kind of always sort of developing. And in a sense, that's what we're doing today, and that relationship of how we understand what we're doing, but also this sort of idea about kind of how education and pedagogy, which is quite close to my research and thinking, is a sort of structural reflection of a lot of those things, like how we understand what education is, but also how we understand what education is relates to the sort of our structural understanding of the world and how we organize ourselves, and then how that is feeding into the particular moment where we're dealing with ideas about truth, and post-truth, and the sort of degradation of critical faculties, and also relationality, and how that comes right back into the structures of the world, like, our neoliberal economy, and then how that has an effect on our politics and our society and our trust and understanding of each other, and how we're in a moment where all of these things are kind of layers and we're all kind of missing each other. But all of those things are so interrelated. So, I mean, I think I'm really interested about, I work a lot about the processes of how we come to understand things, and how theory relates to practice, and how we understand and format that within collaborative structures. So I think what Sven said about that kind of the positioning, and how then artistic work and relationality in terms of what is productive or unproductive, how that will be mediated through these ideas, I think is kind of what we're all in the business of doing. but it's funny because I'm sort of going through this process of active listening, because obviously everybody is listening, but it's this sort of different ways of synthesizing and understanding information, which I think is, you know, the sort of meat and potatoes of thinking and being and existing.
So I think that in the both fields, economic fields and maybe also the field of the aesthetic education and artistic practice, we have a different kind of abstraction processes. And what did actually artistic practice did at the beginning of the 20th century in order to become his own autonomy, you know, they used geometric forms in order not to represent somebody else. This process happened also in the economy. So the economy within the 19th century till today is very much working with the models, which are the high level, we have there a high level of abstraction, or how do you call it? Abstraktion, we would say it in German. And there you have this moment where you very easy can forget the body and the affects and the emotions. Since I think maybe since 1998, we have a kind of artistic practice which is very much reflecting on this kind of developments. And what I really think is that artistic practice can contribute to the discussion on the economy and politics and society is that she is introducing the body into the process again. Beginning maybe with the performative art. So I think there is a kind of a dialectic between these two processes, and why it's very important to think or to connect these practices. On the level, what is also again, because what really happened is that this kind of the neoclassic economy, where you can somehow count, you know, very much count your work process in order to see how much output you are producing, came into the world of art very much. And I think we should have a process that is coming again from not just art, but from also other fields into the economy. Economy need this kind of heterodoxy because the neoclassic is very much, or neoliberal moment is very much present. And of course, we are also at the moment where we have this moment of digital influence into the society. We have the moment where we have to think much more about, I forgot the word in English, Gemeinwohl, about Commonwealth and all these kind of things at the moment, and about ecological questions. So I think, yeah, I think it's a very good moment to discuss the term productivity in a different ways, and that's the reason why I'm interested in it. And what's very paradoxical, for example, concerning the neoclassic, is that it was, when you look at that every consumer, through his own subjective preference, can decide on the market, has a very much a democratic moment. But this is such an ideal moment that is not really, you cannot make it really realistic, or we are not there. Mladen Stilinovic, who is who is a Croatian artist. He died, I think, 2 years ago. And he made a work with the title Praise of Laziness. So he was thinking about the role of the laziness in the society, and I will give him a word for 2 minutes. just in order that you
this is this art piece is not performance. This is just a photography. And why I insist that it's not performance, because it's thinking about photography and some dramaturgy inside this. And then in the 70s, when I did this, I think about performance. What is when it's finished, you must have a video or photography. So why you do performance in public space? So in that sense, I think this is a photography piece. And I like to stay like that. To people invent that I perform here or something. And then, you know, recently they spoke that I here was laying 24 hours, but this is finished in 5 minutes, you know. This is what I do. Yeah, when I came here in Hong Kong, I think about to do this praise of laziness in my text, like a painting. So I asked Cosmin and staff here to, it's possible. And fortunately, it's possible because this village is very near here and they do it in 1 day. So I was very satisfied because many times they invited me to exhibit these, and then in the end become a painting, not a text. And then it's one point, and the second point is also about laziness, because I don't do this. The other people do this because if I do this, I will live like a month. It's very precise work. So, but I like it how they do it, and now it's some kind of painting, and I'm satisfied with this very.
So you heard the artist speaking about his own work, and there's here also a text about what this work is speaking about. And what is interesting, he's speaking about duality between East and West societies. He's writing, or somebody else is writing about him, but his argumentation is that artists in the West are not lazy, and therefore are not artists, but rather producers of something. Their involvement with matters of no importance, such as production, promotion, gallery system, museum system, competition system, who is first? Their preoccupation with objects, all that drives them away from laziness, from art. Just as money is paper, so is gallery a room. So he's speaking, when we think about Bourdieu and his connection that he's putting between the cultural field and the society, and how the also cultural field is very much influenced by the economic and political field. So we have it here very precisely actually argumented why this moment of the laziness is not part of the game when you become an actor of the market. Again, then it's a kind of the polarization that he's suggesting here, but he's writing like artists from the East were lazy and poor because the entire system of insignificant factors did not exist. So no market, no galleries, not so many, I think. They were there, but not in that quantity. So therefore they had enough time to concentrate on art and laziness. Even when they did produce art, they knew it was in vain, it was nothing. So it was not produced for a market. That would be something what Georges Bataille would say, that's perfect moment of the waste. He also suggests us not to accumulate capital, but to waste it. And then Stilinovich's conclusion is that the artists from the West could learn about laziness, but they didn't. Two major 20th century artists treated the question of laziness in both practical and theoretical terms. And he's quoting the two artists, canonic artists of the Western world, which are Duchamp and Malevich, Marcel Duchamp and Kazimir Malevich. And they were already thinking about this moment of the laziness, and Duchamp in this quotation was very lucky because he have never worked for a living. And he say, thanks to my luck, I was able to manage without getting wet. So his hope that someday we'll be able to live without being obliged to work. And what's interesting about this sentence, I hope that someday we'll be able to live without being obliged to work, is that all these kind of economic theoreticians like Adam Smith, Marx, Keynes later, they all thought that at this moment in the 21st century, we can somehow decide what we want to work. That was their imagination. Why do we have to have this kind of division of labor and this kind of technological innovation? Because it's a process of suffering, but this process of suffering will bring us to the moment where we don't have to do that. So Marcel Duchamp is also thinking in this direction. And actually, I haven't knew that Kazimir Malevich wrote the text Laziness, the Real Truth of Mankind, where Stilinovic is quoting him, people are scared of laziness and persecute those who accept it. And it always happens because no one realizes laziness is the truth. So it's like Georges Bataille saying waste is a truth, so he's saying laziness is the truth. It has been branded as the mother of all vices, but it is in fact the mother of life. Socialism brings liberation in the unconscious. It scorns laziness without realizing it was laziness that gave birth to it. So he's very sorry about this moment where the socialism also put the work as the must part of the society. So when we go above and look at this, or down at this work of Stilinovic, we see the artist sleeping in his bed. Actually, it's a series of photographies. As he said, it took him 5 minutes to make the photography, but the question is how many minutes took him to make the idea of that. And then again, he was speaking about the moment where he's giving to other people to write texts for him in Hong Kong. So he's outsourcing his own work. He's very much thinking on the question of work and productivity. So this is also a work of him, and he's writing here the work cannot be existence. The work cannot be existence. And here again, the work cannot be existence. Here he's writing, I have been working on this work since June 11, 1976. The work is done 1980s. An attack on my art is an attack on socialism and progress in 1977. Work, order, and peace. He's very much playing, he's a Yugoslav artist, and very much playing also on a very satiric way on this symbolic of the Yugoslav brotherhood and unity. And the conditions of my work are not in my hands, but fortunately they are not in yours either. Yeah, maybe we can, for short, discuss or come into the conversation if you like. If you don't like, we can go forward on about this thoughts on laziness from Stilinovic that he had in the 70s, but then again reflect on them till he's dead, actually. So this counterpart of work, which is actually laziness, and when we spoke about the question that was posed, like, okay, now we had this input and then we have to react on it, and what does it really mean, is actually also these questions about processes where we have time, or we are not obliged to think, but we can of course think about things, but it's not labeled with the word, with the term work.
I'm thinking of Mary Kelly's postpartum document. I'm gonna presume that everyone knows that, but so, and coming from a highly personal position, I had a baby last year, so I'm dealing with all of these, whatever. So look, I'm juxtaposing that work with his work, and really, the conditions that exist that allow people to make certain types of work, and who has voices on the topics of productivity. And it seems predominantly they are male voices because they have the time to collate their thoughts on it, and it comes back to this temporal question. So that's kind of my first thought. I mean, I love his work, and I love that piece of work, and yet it's somewhat infuriating as well. But then I guess it's so of its time,
But I think it's very interesting to bring in the term productivity here, because obviously he's lazy, but he's very productive. So, I mean, if he only took 5 minutes to produce this kind of work, so he was lazy, but it made him super productive. So I think it is also an interesting aspect. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What I really like about Selinovich's work is the humor. You have this moment of a humor which brings actually, because the colleague just spoke a few minutes ago about the question or the play, like the role of the play within the educational process. I think the role of the humor is also a very important one when we are trying to reflect on things, because then we are bringing some kind of this balance, which on a very nice way, which give us the possibility to think about that as Iris just, or the Iris just give this moment of the paradox very productive, on the other hand praising for the laziness at the same moment.
I think
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it comes down maybe to agency, particularly with him. He's chosen when to produce, when not to produce. And I was thinking of a quote from Moses Hess, who's essentially saying it's not the type of work that people, that work against. It's the social relations around that work. Mm-hmm. And so he's controlling those social relations. He's controlling what he does, when he does it, how he does it. And that's kind of different. So somebody else who's forced to do exactly what he did will be in a very different situation. So I think it's a kind of an agency over when you begin and when you end your work that allows him to be in praise of laziness and at the same time productive at the same time. And there's a quote, he quotes Duchamp about being lucky. So there's also a kind of a necessity to earn versus the freedom not to have to earn, and that comes from, the art world is kind of full of existing wealth, and there's artists everywhere that have no monetary or financial pressures. And I guess it comes a little bit back to what somebody was saying a second ago about having the time to contemplate not working is also a luxury.
Absolutely, yeah. It's also about privilege, like luck and privilege on the other hand. Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I have to say, in the 70s, when this work was produced, they were not rich artists. They were, Stilinovic was working together with other artists in Croatia or in Zagreb, and he was really thinking, I think, very much on the definition of the term work. It's not coming from that position that you are a kind of privileged or you're an elite, and that's the reason why you can decide on your what was maybe the privilege that he was born in the socialist Yugoslavia. So there was still a kind of social protection within the society, but still, I think, also in order to reflect on the system and to give a critical attitude to this imagination that work can produce a freedom, is also something what he's very much discussing in his work. So it's very much also reflecting the symbolics and the ideologies of the system, Yugoslav system in itself at that moment, and also the role of the artist. But yeah, that's at that moment they were, or I think never, he was a very wealthy man at that concern, yeah. Okay, maybe we can go to the other work from Alicja Rogalska. I always forgot her. What's really pity. And she worked it together with a colleague of her, Lukáš. It's his first name. I forgot the second name. And I would like you to have a look at the first 4 minutes of the video, Tia Dealer. So the Tier Dealer is an artistic project, and before giving our interpretation or our thoughts about it, I would like to ask you, what do you think about the work?
I was sort of surprised how, well, maybe it's just a reaction, you know, a reaction when you're watching people going through something emotional, but it's a direct process, so it feels unnatural. But I kind of, there is a lot of humor in that, weirdly. I don't know whether there's a sort of, it's a reaction to the ludicrousness of it. You know, a sort of the uncomfortableness, but also, yeah, I think that idea of just what we've been talking about throughout the morning, this sort of framing of work and the framing of labor and that emotional labor. And, you know, it's no more ridiculous than other forms of work and what we sell, you know, and this is literally bodily fluids that come through a process. But I thought it was an interesting framing of some of those ideas that we've been thinking about and talking about.
I think I would definitely buy tears. You know, it's not completely absurd. To, you know, there seems to be that they're going for an element of absurdity, but it's not, you know.
I think for me, the only amusing / absurd bit was the measuring system for calculating the amount of price, which is interesting because up to then it's a very kind of affective, emotional relationship between both us, the viewer, and what's going on there in the space. And then suddenly it becomes measured. It becomes completely neoliberal, and they are somehow graded on their performance and rewarded through a kind of financial feedback system. And you see the person moving down through the little measurement systems to see how much they've earned. I'm curious if they started at the most money or started at the least, if they rewarded themselves each time they moved, or if they demoted themselves each time they moved and shifted down. But it was interesting that, you know, the first 3.5 minutes were about an act where these people were traveling through time and space in their imaginations and kind of dragging up maybe happy but presumably painful experiences to create the tears, and then all of a sudden it becomes quantified and monetized. And I guess it's a nice analogy for how everything in life is quantifiable and monetizable. The other thing I thought of was the Martin Creed work, where he had his gallery assistants vomiting on a video as their analogy for the first painting, or shitting on a video as their analogy for the first sculpture. and this kind of connection between body and production. So I was curious in my head as to where Martin Creed would place tears. Maybe performance, I don't know.
Yeah, it's actually the people didn't know that this is an artistic project. So it is made in Lubin, in Poland, the city which is very much near to the German border. It was an industrial city. It has at the moment economic problems, as most post-industrial cities have. And the people, it was like about 20 euros for 3 milliliter of tears. That was the price. And the people went there and they somehow decided to sell their tears. What was my moment when I saw the work for the first time, I was thinking, you know, that tears or a scream is something when you do not, it's a moment of the border. It's a kind, the individual has this kind of the tool to show to the others that something is wrong or it is emotionally affected by something. And I had a feeling if we really come to this moment where we are selling the tears, that's really a kind of a very strange moment for the humanity, because this power instrument of an individual, it's becoming the good. And the Alicia is writing what I think it's really interesting. The project investigates community building processes that shift the focus from the sphere of rational choices to the forces that bind the collective body through the energy of common experience. It's an interesting moment where she's thinking, okay, it's a kind of, after this experience, the people, they become in a collective body without knowing that actually within this artistic project, through this moment of the selling the tears. And what she's also giving the reference to is there is a Górskie Żale, or Bitter Lamentations. It's a song in Poland. It's very much connecting to Catholicism because the people are singing this song in the name of Mary as the Christ was murdered, or yeah. So this is a kind also of a collective sorrow. And the song is "Let us pray in contemplation while we sing this lamentation with eyes tearful, hearts repenting. Let us grieve with no relenting. The sun and stars are fading, sadness, nature all pervading. Host of angels sadly weeping, who'll explain their deep bereaving, and so on. So this is this song. Yeah, I think it's very interesting work for me in this connection to the question of ethics concerning in connection to the definition of the good. Yeah, and in the definition of the society. It's very much obvious that you can sell everything, that you can sell even the tears if the individuum is accepting these conditions. And yeah. Are there any other comments or?
I was thinking when you were saying that about kind of what can be extracted from somebody. I was thinking a little bit about, you know, the artist Barbara Staveni, who is involved in the artist placement group, who founded it. She passed away, I guess, a few months ago, which I just found out about last week. And, you know, a lot of her final latter works were about you know, kind of considering herself as an archive, you know, as all of her kind of, and I just started thinking as we were watching that video about, again, just like shifting it back to the things that we deal with as people who are trying to produce certain kinds of work as artists, maybe, or as other, whatever we're working on. And just this value of us trying to extract everything from ourselves, of capturing everything as like an element of process that can be used to either prove that work was done, or to move on to, you know, to put into a system like this that can be monetized and quantified. And I think that, you know, just to kind of, I don't know, like in really considering this question of work, I think a figure like Barbara Staveni and her body of work is really super relevant, you know, in terms of how she questions the role of the artist in society, but also just in terms of her own, really in her own practice, and looking at herself as an archive that way.
When we come to the archive, or question of the archive, there is a work of Dušica Dražić, New City, which she did in 2013. And she made a kind of maquette of non-existing city. I'm just, yeah, here I would like to show you this maquette. And what's interesting about this is that all these buildings are not existing anymore, but they were built. And at the one moment, the society decided to destroy them because they were not functional, or they do not suit to the ideological direction of the society. And what Dušica did, she took these buildings, and like the urbanist after the Second World War, she made a kind of a city with them, with a lot of free space between the buildings. It's a kind of an archive of those buildings, but it's also an interesting moment that she is putting the buildings of a different contexts into a kind of a unity, and show us, and again is making her own structure of the city field. So he's also showing this moment where we can think about the question of the green space and of the public space. We are in the 60s and 70s, or even at the beginning of the 20th centuries, they were very much discussing those formats. At the moment, we are again in the time where these public spaces are shortened, are becoming smaller because of the immobilian market, which is very, very vivid since 2008, and become one of the most important investing fields. Yeah. Another work of her, which is very much maybe a kind of can be thought in combination with the New City, is the one constructed landscape. It's as her father, Milutin Dražić, he was a landscape architect, and he was participant of a project, Pešter. So between 1973 and 1988, in southwestern Serbia, 150 hectares of forest was actually eingepflanzt, was actually planted, yeah. And it was realized through state-organized voluntary labor done by youth work actions. So Dušica say that anthropogenic forms are very precise. They have a very precise form. They are based on the scientific research. And on the other hand, they are open again for the experiment and the improvement. So yeah, she's asking herself also which kind of forests could be constructed in the future and how they would look like. In the both of the works, we have this moment of the construction and deconstruction. We have this moment on the shaping of the space and try to put in a kind of an ideological idea of how collectiveness should work into it. In both cases, Pešter is also I think it's become a kind. It was an experiment, and it was a project where they put very much research into it. And at the moment, it's a kind of it's a man-made forest, but at the moment they do not really take care about that. So we can watch a short excerpt from the video. So in both works, there is a question how a kind of ideas or ideologies shape the environment, and what happened to them after the transition, or after these ideologies are somehow not the main force of the society anymore. And how do we have these moments of the continuity? Because we have these ideas of what is productive. And at one moment we have the cut. And after the cut, for example, during the socialist Yugoslavia, the work was that what was productive. And after the fall of the wall, Berlin Wall, the capital was that what was productive. So we have a kind of, and all these kind of ideas have also the influence on our built environment and of our, as we can see, of our shaping of the natural environment, but also on that question of the continuities. Because when we have these kind of political changes that very much happen, is that nobody is thinking about the continuities or about a specific kind of transitions, which are maybe not, which are not so radical, but soft. Yeah. Do you have experience in Dublin that are connected to this? Or in other parts of Ireland? I don't know where you are from. I think you had a very much building construction processes in the like around 2000 till 2004, where you have this huge crisis, but please correct me if I'm not right. I'm just...
What kinds of building projects?
Because you, as we were in Dublin, Sven, you told me about this kind of the city projects in Dublin that have a kind of big, as they were like huge projects, and at the moment of the economic crisis, that was not possibility to finish them, for example, or to realize them.
Sure. Yeah. No, there were a lot of things that were started, and the one that we were looking at was Smithfield Square, and the kind of ambitions, the original ambitions for that space, and how it was supposed to kind of work within the city, which was really abandoned afterwards, never resolved, and picked up a few times. All of these things are, of course, in quite a bit of flux again. It would be good for you to, next time, hopefully maybe next year when you come back to do more of this workshop, it would be quite interesting to look at the city again. It changes quickly. And it is, I mean, you can really read these kind of paradigm shifts and these kind of shifts in continuity, like you were saying, just in the form of the city.
Because, for example, in this kind of forest, which they realized in southwestern Serbia, it's interesting that who did it. So here, the people, the youth work actions, it was people, so young people did the work. And for example, at the end of the 19th century, at the island Brijuni in Croatia, an Austrian industry guy came there and bought the island and also planted a forest. But the one who did it were actually the peasants or the local people. So it was his idea to do that, and he organized the people who will do that for him. And I think this moment when we are speaking about architects or urban planner or people who has a lot of money and invested into the building processes, the question is again, and those people are forgotten, who really did the work? How this work were organized? How this work were paid? What were the conditions of this work? Because so a lot of us are now like going or walking through these forests or are using those buildings and so on. And this question is Marx moment into this question, who is actually, and there is another work of Ferhat Itzka that I wanted to show you, but I don't have the password for the video, where he's showing how the workers in Turkey are building a new apartments. And at the beginning of the video, he's showing their own homes. Then you are really seeing this moment, which are not in very good conditions. Then you're really seeing this moment that those people are building homes, very nice homes for other people. And at the same moment, they cannot really build homes at the same quality for them. And that's also a paradox, where we are coming to the moment of the work and the productivity, and then also at the output of the work. So for whom, you know, who has which possibilities and who is working for whom? And this question is becoming, it's more important today than in the 80s and 90s, I think, because we have a much more increasing level of social inequality. not just in the artistic field, but also very much in the economic field. Yeah, are there any comments on the work of Dušica Dražić? She's originally from Belgrade, where she studied, and afterwards she studied in Weimar, and now she's living in Antwerp in Belgium, and has a very nice and interesting exhibition space, which is called Out of Sight.
Don't really have, am I on mute? I don't really have direct comments maybe about the work, but well, I'm thinking about the idea of the youth being involved in doing the labor. And from my kind of experience here in Ireland, when there's a situation that the youth are involved in providing labor for a project, the kind of outcome of the project seems to almost be less important than the process. And the activity is an activity in itself to either educate or change the youth behavior if it's from kind of a social problems, or to occupy the youth if it's kind of during summer months, or there's kind of a almost two processes happening at the same time, where there's the one is the work and the production of whatever it is, and then the outcome is almost secondary, where the youth are involved as a kind of a preemptive way to prevent vandalism and gain some sense of ownership.
Yeah, it's distraction. The youth are used, you know, to distract them rather than, yeah, the outcome isn't important. I really find that as well.
Can I just ask about the type of forest? Because one of the issues in Ireland is forests that are built of monoculture like this, which is just one type of tree, and they actually are sort of deserts, really. There's no wildlife in them because they're just one type of tree. They don't feed anything. Like these Serbian forests, are they fake forests, really?
They're fake forests, and what I know from other projects, I have to ask Dušica concerning this forest. I know from the other project that they, at the Briuni, for example, at the Mali Lošinj, they decided to use a specific tree because it's a little bit difficult for me in English to say it, because this tree is producing humus. And it was the idea that, you know, it is at the first you have the one tree, the one sort of tree, which is producing a kind of a humus. And then in the second phase of the project, you are trying to plant another sort of trees. So it's a kind of, you have phases. I don't know if this is case in this project, but at Mali Lošinj it was necessary because you needed to have the production of the humus and the production of the earth, which you needed for the plants which need, I don't know it, which, also die Pflanzen, die halt mehr Wurzeln haben, tiefere Wurzeln haben. Kannst du das sagen?
Enriching the soil.
Deeper roots, yeah. They needed a kind, for the plants which have deeper roots, you needed a kind of enough earth. And at first they plant one sort of the trees, which nadeln, which needles are
needles drop on the ground.
Yeah, and they are producing humus, and then you can plant another sorts of the plants. That was the case in Mali Lošinj, and that's the reason why they had at first time the monoculture, in order to make the conditions for the planting other sorts of trees.
It just seems that usually what happens is nothing else grows there.
It does. It kind of creates that sponginess in the ground, and then we're supposed to kind of cut them down and, you know, do something else with the land. But in Ireland, they're just the expense of cutting them down now is so problematic that it's too expensive even to cut them down. But I never knew that actually the soil was enriched by the needles, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Just put up a link there. There's a project in Dublin City Council where they've realized that these fake productive forests for wood are, I guess the value's not there in them, and that they're creating forests for people. So they realized there's an average of 500 people a day visiting these walking areas in Dublin mountains. So they're planting diverse forests which have, you know, kind of a, I suppose, a pseudo rewilding effect, where they're putting the original trees there and they're removing those kind of mono species forests and replanting them the way they would have been originally. And I think it's quite a huge project that's starting, and it's going to happen over the next number of years.
Oh, okay. It's very interesting.
Actually, in relation to that, there's an area in Dublin called the Hellfire Club, which is an old ruin in a forest that it's one of these places Alan mentions that people go to walk, and it's in it's in its natural state at the moment, which isn't its natural state. It's these fake forests, but there's not official walking paths or signage, or, you know, it's not a managed space for recreation. So part of these developments that they're proposing of switching the use of the forest to something for recreation is being hugely opposed by a lot of people, because, well, for multiple reasons that I won't spend time going into now. But what's happening is you had a space that was used for one function that was kind of acquired by the general populace to be used for leisure. It wasn't intended to be used for leisure, but it is now used for leisure. And now the people who manage these spaces want to produce them as specific places for leisure, but in their ideology of what leisure should be. So one of the main objections to the development of the site is that they want to put in a coffee shop. And you have this situation in Ireland where you can't go anywhere without there being a fucking coffee shop, because they think that leisure is to consume. So it's this repurposing of, I guess the point I'm trying to make is people already were going to this site as a means of being within space, and now the official channels want to manage that way of being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, monetize it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not to just monetize it. Well, yeah, monetize it, absolutely, but it's for me, like my feeling of it is that it's even more to do with social control, so that your leisure time is designated and managed by the architecture and the pathways and the engagement, you know. So you become passive, you become passive rather than active within the act of your leisure. Does that make sense?
I have a feeling that kind of already exists. There seem to be, granted they're probably organically created, but there's definitely defined walking spaces, and people all follow the same paths. And so I haven't read in depth enough, but I feel like that kind of already exists, you know.
Yeah, but my understanding is that with what's proposed is that it will be even more of that kind of, you know, barricades and designations of space, and like very highly managed.
Interesting.
So while it's being celebrated in that they're going to diversify the trees, and there is a lot of benefits to it from a nature point of view, it's all done with a view of having these highly curated leisure spaces. And this is where you come to relax, and then you go to work, and you never the two shall meet, and you know, it's all to remind you that you are a productive work being, you know. And also part of the problem is that the infrastructure is not there because everybody's going there on a Saturday, and everybody's going there at a certain time, because these leisure spaces are being, you know, it's all worked to this really archaic idea of when people relax and when people work.
I think the last work we can speak about is the work, named work from Marianne Flotron, a Swiss artist living at the moment in Amsterdam. It's actually, maybe we begin to listen to Hector, and then I can give you a few comments on it.
What are we doing here? What are we doing in this skyscraper of corporate Netherlands? I almost said corporate America. The corporate world. and bringing theater of the oppressed to the corporate world. The idea was, can we bring this, this tool to ask questions to a place where apparently no one is asking questions, especially questions about themselves, about what work means for them, about whether they are working too hard or not, about whether work is functioning in their lives, about if work is connected to the larger structures in society. So we brought the techniques here, and we had from 2,000 employees, we had one employee who said, yes, okay, I'm going to explore. We asked them questions, we interviewed them as well to see what could they tell us about how they feel being in this place. So we asked the questions using theater. We created scenes in which we challenge those questions. And even during the improvisations or the little short role plays, we were able to see that there was a crack. And a crack in the sense that there was like a protocol that they follow to say we are communicating, a protocol to say that I'm asking for help and inviting you to take care of yourself. But once the protocol is fulfilled, there was no true connection. There was no true understanding of what's happening with the other person, of what is the price of doing what we're doing. So most of the workers we interview and that appear in the scenes were people who said they were free. They were very stable in their jobs. They were well paid, and they were very comfortable. They felt a sense of security. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I wish most people in the world would feel that. However, when we question what is the price you're paying for that freedom, so then most of them, what we felt is that have identified their work as their lives. And most of them have definitely prioritized work and the demands of work over other things, not just their personal lives, their family lives, but their dreams. They use the reasoning that they use for other things to not be participants. They said, we're too busy, we're going outside, we have a meeting. They use work to avoid questioning work. And in that sense, it was interesting for us to discover that. For me, I come here after spending 5 weeks in Colombia. I was in Colombia working with the leaders of the internally displaced people. And many of the people that came to the workshop had received death threats because of their work. They were told, you cannot speak about your work. And yet they came, and they were risking their lives. And they came and they questioned their worlds, and they questioned, for example, the women questioned their husbands, questioned their co-workers, questioned machismo and the gender inequalities and all these things that I saw here at a different level. So in a place like Colombia, where people are told, we're going to kill you, and indeed some people are killed for talking about your work, for talking about your life, people do it. Here in a place where you are supposedly free to speak and to question, people seem very afraid.
So that is the Hector who was invited to make the oppressed theater in an insurance company in Netherlands, and I think you get out a lot of information from his comments. Another person who I want to show you is a human resource manager in this company. Which is speaking also about the workers.
HR is a profession, and in my firm, it's mainly advise the managers. The managers are responsible for the HR of the people, of their employees, and I advise and support them. In my firm, it's very important that people take their responsibility. There's a lot of freedom in work. But, at the same time, you must deal with that responsibility. And it is very important that there is a lot of trust between people. That when you distrust your employees, for instance, then you cannot give them the freedom. You have to be in touch with your employees. When you don't see them, then you have to look for other ways to be in touch. And they work at home, or they work at another floor, or they work at another building. So you have to follow how they are doing in work, but also in personal concerns. When you give people the freedom to work at home or anywhere, then you have to have targets to check if everything is all right. And the targets are.
So we see here, I just want to show you that was Crisis as Ideology, an exhibition that I curated in Kunstraum Niederösterreich, and that are 4 projections which are part of this work of Marianne Flottron titled work. So what we really see are these 2 protagonists, the one, the Hector, who wanted within the theater form to come into the conversation about the work conditions within this insurance company. And on the other hand, we heard a person who is responsible for human resources, who very much spoke about the responsibilities of the workers and actually their responsibility to perform the work for the company. I think it's an interesting work in order as show very much the mechanisms and the structures within the global companies, which are on one hand also, if you look, because now we haven't seen it, but they are very much very much designed as a home spaces. You have these spaces where you can sit down in the corners. You have they are very comfortable spaces. There are a lot of couches around and so on. On the one hand, you have also in the most companies the freedom to decide when do you want to work, but you don't have the freedom to decide about the quantity of the work. And what came out in this particular piece is that the employees of this company do not really want, has the interest, or are able or are allowed actually to rethink about their work and organizational structure. Marx would call that fetish character of the good. And I think that Flottron very much, or very, very clearly show this moment of lack of the spaces where the workers or employees of a global companies are discussing their working conditions. They are very much into this mantra that they had a perfect conditions and that they are very happy to be elected to work for such a great company. So we have here a kind of illusion about the moment of a high productivity or high expectations of the workers' productivity, and on the other hand, about the company in itself is also making the brand of her successful, as she's a very successful market player. I think these 2 conditions are coming together. Global companies which are becoming the market leaders, and which are building this brand, and the people who are allowed to work for them and to be part of this kind of the condition, which then again are but not really allowed to discuss the working structures and organizational structures, or they are allowed to discuss them, but just in the connection to the increasing of the productivity and capital accumulation. And I think this discourse in the economy can be really observed since 1990s very much, as the companies are gaining the market parts and becoming very much like a global players. How the productivity is somehow thought is very much depending on the macro society, but also, yeah, I think what we really wanted to show is that it's a very constructed term, and it is also always a space and a place to destabilize this kind of the term. And of course, the artistic practice is very much has this role to do that, but on the other hand, it's also part of the game. So this kind of ambiguity is what we really also wanted to show. With these examples, like from Dušica Dražić, what I did not say, but I think it's very important to be said in this connection, is that artists are the one in the ex-Yugoslavia who are making the archive of the previous society, because the new countries are not very much, or the power leaders of the new countries, Croatia, Bosnia, and so on, are very much, has a great interest to forget it, because it is a kind of a paradigm that maybe if we would more discuss about it, would destabilize their own power today. So yeah, there are a lot of levels that I hope we can talk together for a longer period next year or sometimes, because I think there are a lot of things that we have to discuss.